Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that you guys have all been well. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe, and if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's a ton of stuff that has been happening throughout the world since we last went live, obviously, and a lot of stuff that has happened over the last about a week or so. So it's good to be back live and on air. And of course, everything we do here on the new news is about trying to help people in regards to the different situations ongoing throughout the world, regardless of where they may happen. So whether that be Ukraine, whether that be in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, South America, or even in North America and elsewhere, we want to try and help as many people as we can, which is why we're doing this. We're trying to bring some information in a kind of an independent way about what's happening in these locations and give some light to some of the wonderful organizations that have been operating there. 100% of everything we do here is about charity, so if you want to jump down into that video description and check out the wonderful organizations that have been listed there, each of them have been suggested by you as the viewers, and we've gone through and we've reviewed them to ensure that 70% or more of the donations that they receive go directly to their programs, meaning they go directly to helping people, with 30% or less of those funds raised going to things such as salaries and administration's costs. So that may be why you may see some organizations down there that are notable, but that don't follow into that criteria. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things that you guys can do is actually to help spread the word about the channel, going out there and, giving us those likes and subscribes and sharing our information in the different community spaces maybe you're a part of really does help the channel, the growth, and obviously it gets people informed about what's happening in the world around them and the wonderful organizations trying to improve the lives of the people affected by each of these different scenarios. So thank you very much for all the support you've already given us here at the New News, and we hope to continue doing this long and into the future. And so with that, we get ready to move into the news. But before I do, I want to just acknowledge everyone that happens to already be here live. If you happen to have any questions while we're here on the channel, you can go ahead and throw them into the live chat. I am watching that. Hello, everyone. Riley and Demise. It's always good to see you. Aravist, of course. And so we can go ahead and get some of those addressed. To give you a little bit of a background on myself, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I served as an 0352 anti-tank missileman and a corporal with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. I did 2 tours to the Middle East. My first tour was between October of 2017 and March of 2018, where I did about a month and a half inside of Kuwait before rotating over into Syria, where I spent about 4.5 months providing direct support to Special Operations Forces and fighting the Islamic State, as well as providing stabilization efforts in the northeastern part of Syria. I returned to the United States and ran an armory for my company for about a year and a half before redeploying as a Javelin team leader with Crisis Response Company out of Kuwait, there where I spent the majority of my time. This is between October of 2019 through March of 2020. During that time, on New Year's of 2020, I actually went to the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, where I oversee all anti-armor operations in response to the attack on the embassy. I was there for, obviously, the assassination of General Qasem al-Soleimani, as well as all of the wonderful events that took place during that about 2.5 weeks that I was there, or about 2.5 weeks following that. And then I ripped out of there about a month and a half later and went down to Saudi Arabia, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines preparing to deploy to Yemen. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armor doctrine. I'm also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, as well as a CLS certified Marine, meaning I've received additional medical training on top of what most Marines are going to receive, and I do have real-world experience providing aid to casualties. Now, in this day and age, I am now a logistical coordinator for a motor vehicle transportation company, so I'm rather well versed in logistics as well. So outside of that, I do have interest in other things: history, human geography, science, that kind of thing, but I am not an expert in any of them. Expert or not, though, I always implore that you as a viewer, please do your own research, as there is no substitute for any of it. So please, if you would like to have a foundation to start with, all of our links are available on our website. The link's in the description below. You can go and actually follow along with the stream, as this has already been posted, and you can check on all of those links and follow those news stories and their sources where we're getting that from, so you guys can go and check it out. And if we have any other articles from other major news sources as well that's associated with those, we also have those listed too. And with that, we get ready to move directly into the news here. Hello, Pale Horse. Always welcome to see you, man. And we jump down here and immediately begin, of course, in the hot topic of Ukraine. We actually, instead of starting in Kyiv today, the capital, we actually start all the way out here in Lviv on the western side of the country, as there's been several developments that have taken place inside the city of Lviv. And the first one is the fact that a missile did strike a residential area in Lviv. And it struck right there in downtown. Lviv itself is actually labeled as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it receives special protections by the United Nations. And so, as a result of this, we do have UNESCO individuals and UN individuals there on the ground who are taking a look at the site, seeing kind of what's going on, and assisting in those efforts, as they already have been inside of Ukraine elsewhere. The struck itself very seriously damaged a residential building, pretty much completely destroyed it, as well as severely damaged many of the apartments and residential areas around it. So far, we know of at least 4 people have been killed and another 9 injured. That number may have actually gone up quite significantly to at least 34 injured, according to one report that we saw. But we're going to stick with 9 because that is what we know from official sources so far. Multiple groups are currently now in Lviv providing different wide range of services to the civilians in that area, both psycho services and medical services as well. This is coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is their drone footage and footage they've taken from the site of the attack there in the city of Lviv. So we can take a look here. Right now, this is some of the drone footage. They're going down the street, and you can see the damage that was caused. This is the residential building on the left. We also have looks like a commercial building there on the right. And you can see this entire top section, this entire top floor of this building completely leveled. And you see the damage. It's a very widespread. We're unsure what kind of munition specifically was used here. It could have been anything from a Shahed drone, which is very common. Unlikely to have been an Iskander-M ballistic missile or a Caliber cruise missile, just because of the damage patterns. Usually those are going to be much more significant in their size and scope of damage, even though it's obviously not a small quantity here. You can see here, we're given some better footage of the damage from the bottom view. And it really shows you just how, and there's entire floors that were just completely leveled. Reminder, this is a residential building. And residential buildings and residential areas, residential infrastructure, are actually protected under the 1949 Geneva Conventions. On top of that, they're further protected by additional Protocol 1 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which actually prohibits planning or carrying out attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure and highly civilian dense areas. So just the planning of this attack is considered a war crime under additional Protocol 1, as well as the carrying out of the attack. And the fact that it did target civilians, a civilian area. Civilian infrastructure covers everything from homes, churches, or religious sites in general, cultural sites, hospitals, schools, all of that, unless they're being used for military purposes. Now, throughout the city of Lviv, there are millions of civilians that are currently living there. There are lots of refugees that have come, that have not left Ukraine, but have come over to this part of Ukraine in order to get away from the fighting there in the east. So it's a very dense area right now. There's additional people on top of what would normally be living there. And it's very well known to be the hub of many of this is a very key site and a hub for a lot of also non-governmental and non-profit organizations which are operating inside of Ukraine, because this is a staging point for a lot of the supplies coming in from Poland and then going and getting carried out over to Kyiv and then dispersed out through the rest of Ukraine. So this is a very big hub for a lot of different things. And also it's a protected UNESCO World Heritage Site. So a lot of different reasons for this site to have not been attacked, but unfortunately it was nonetheless. If I can get clicked on this again, we can see some of the NGO work ongoing here. This is IOM Ukraine, who is currently handing out, water and other food items and basic relief for individuals that were living in the apartment complex. Red Cross assisting in medical efforts and in providing temporary shelter until these individuals that were displaced out of this complex can be moved to a more permanent structure. as well as immediate rescue efforts. UNESCO also chiming in here in regards to this. Lviv, Ukraine at UNESCO condemns the attack on the buffer zone of the World Heritage Site. Speaking of different NGO efforts, Child Spots are providing Ukrainian kids with relief. The UNICEF, which is the United Nations International Child's Funds, basically, and partners have opened at Spilno Child Spot at the Lviv rail station to provide kids and families fleeing from the war or returning to the country some relief. Spot consists of large playrooms, a play tent, a room for breastfeeding and diaper changing, coloring books, and board games are on offer. And UNICEF psychologists are available for those who do need assistance. And we're actually getting a lot of information now in regards to this. But just take a look. This is coming from UNICEF Ukraine, and this is in regards to the child spot that they just opened at Spilno there in Lviv.
Зайшли просто так подивитися, навіть не встиг нічого оглянутися, як я вже в бахілах тут стою і бавлюся з дітьми.
Сподобалось.
Що найбільше?
Бульбашки.
Мені теж сподобалось. Бульбашки будуть всередині бульбашки. Можна тут звернутися і за медичною допомогою, і якісь консультації отримати, і зарядитись, і просто відпочити.
Тут все є потрібне для дітей. Є умови, де можна передягнути, можна погодувати дитину.
It's pretty awesome work ongoing there for UNICEF. And talking about, we'll get into this a little bit here in a moment, but talking about psychological services especially. Keep in mind, pretty much everyone in Ukraine is affected in some very personal way. Lots of trauma ongoing, especially for children. Children are especially a danger when it comes to being affected by traumatic events for the long term. And so we're seeing a lot of work going towards psychological services for the troops on the front line who are enduring some very difficult scenarios, very traumatic events on a daily basis, essentially. And then also for a lot of civilians, as you can tell, looking at everything that's been ongoing here inside of Ukraine for the last 500 continual days of the war, we're seeing immense amount of emphasis being put on attacks against civilians, civilian infrastructures, civilian targets when it comes to the Russian Federation. These are, one, a war crime. Their scale and scope lends not just to a war crime, but a crimes against humanity, in accordance to definitions by the United Nations, by the Geneva Conventions, by the CCW, by the 1993 Rome Statute, which establishes the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. So there's a lot of need for this. When you're talking about psychologists and you're talking about psychotherapists, that's not something that's in a readily available supply. There's not a lot of people in that field. It's a rather small field, especially for these specific kinds of needs. And so it's been something that's been developing, but is still considered stretched thin. No matter how many groups are actually putting efforts into this, there's just never enough. The size and scope of the war and how the amount of people affected is just overwhelming for any services that are attempting to provide in that region. So it's become a very difficult endeavor, but one that they are continuing to do and have continued to go through since day one of the war. Jump over here into Kyiv, where POWs are returning to Ukraine. Among several prisoner exchanges which took place, the leading figures of the defense of the Azovstal that are Mariupol returned to Ukraine to be with their families after months of residing inside of Turkey. We can take a look at this. This is coming from AP in Ukraine. I'm glad to see everyone is back inside of here. This is coming from the Azov. These are members of the Azov Regiment, as well as, I believe, the 36th Marine Battalion there that was defending the Azovstal clip until the very bitter end. So it's always glad to see them back. It's kind of a nice closure to that whole saga, the whole Azovstal event that has taken place. That battle is something that will be studied for, decades to come. That the defense of Mariupol and the Azovstal is something that is incredibly important in this war. It tied up Russian resources for months on end, and you're talking about and there's no other way but a final stand to be remembered. The amount of effort that was put into delaying the Russian forces in that area under a complete encirclement without any chance and hope of being resupplied, and for as long as it happened, is something that will have to be studied, especially by military commanders throughout the world, just to get an idea of how this was done and how it was done so successfully.
Слава Україні! Слава Україні! Слава Україні! З поверненням!
This is some of the first looks at other Ukrainian POWs who have been returned to Ukraine in recent prisoner exchanges. This is some of the first looks as they have just come back into the country. Uh, 45 Ukrainian POWs and 2 deported children. Driving schools for the disabled. The Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine has launched the No Barriers Initiative, which includes driving schools for persons with disabilities. The program includes inclusive education and adaptive programs to help disabled people learn how to drive. And this is just one step in many, many different developments. Ukraine not only is looking to rebuild, but to rebuild in an improved way. So Ukraine now going into trying to become part of the European Union and trying to improve the situation that hasn't really seen any growth since the collapse of the Soviet Union, other than trying to maintain kind of a stable position in Europe. This war, with the destruction that it has caused and is going to force Ukraine to have to rebuild in a very monumental way. And instead of just trying to rebuild just to fill in what was there before, Ukraine is looking to try and improve the situation and the lives of the people that are within their country when they are going through and rebuilding. They're launching a lot of initiatives on trying to improve psychological services, trying to make a much more inclusive environment within the country, on trying to get assistance for different things. And that's really seen a very dramatic shift since the beginning of the war until now, as Ukraine's really looking forward to trying and rebuilding the country as it would like to. Now, all of these things obviously cost money. There's obviously lots of hurdles. The war isn't even over yet. But it's definitely some very good developments we're seeing coming out of the Ukrainian government on their willingness to do these things to better, the lives of the people of Ukraine. So very good to see these kinds of things rolling out. We can take a look here. This is coming from from Elena Zelenska, who is the First Lady of Ukraine, who's leading a lot of these initiatives. Now, obviously, another big reason for this, as you can see here, this war has caused a lot of different people to become casual. I mean, this has a lot of people who have become casualties, who now are going to have lifelong disabilities, lost limbs, lost hearing, lost eyesight, loss of many things, psychological issues for many people, a lot of post-traumatic stress, amputations. So it's very important that these kinds of steps need to be taken now, because these people, just because you've lost arms and legs and whatever have you, doesn't necessarily mean you're not, you don't have a life left to live. As you can see here, a lot of people are individuals who have been injured in the line of duty, have been injured as civilians, and so this is a necessary step for Ukraine, just to take care of those people who have been wounded throughout the war as well. Unfortunately, we do still have the, unfortunate obligation of talking about war crimes and child casualties, and these numbers continue to climb substantially every single time we talk about them. This is coming directly from the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. Hashtag Russian war crime statistics for the past week, May 30th through June the 7th. 1,095 new crimes registered, at least 494 children killed, 1,051 injured, with the data without full consideration of places of active hostilities, coming from the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. And we can see this coming from their official Twitter as well. So far, 97,060 new war crimes and crimes of aggression, 17,019 crimes against national security. And of course, we can see the increase in those child casualties there on the bottom. 494 killed and 1,051 wounded. That's an increase of 18 since the last official report. This is going to continue to climb, especially as we're seeing more kinetic activity there on the front lines. You're going to see a dramatic increase of casualties and casualty updates as those hostilities become more and more kinetic and more brutal going forward. But getting back to psychological services, as we were talking about before, 80 separate groups are currently working on psychosocial services and support inside of Ukraine, at least 80. They're now operating to provide psychosocial services to both civilians and military personnel alike. Recently, a report was released via ReliefWeb.International, giving an overview of their work throughout the nation. And it is quite an extensive report. We can take a look here. It is both available in Ukrainian and in English. It's coming in the meeting minutes. This is overseen. All of these organizations right now, there are 80 participants. All of these are overseen by the World Health Organization and the International Medical Corps, or the IMC. They're covering different gaps and needs needed throughout Ukraine. There are certainly going to be more that are going to be brought in or that are going to try and shift around some of these focus to fill in some of these gaps, as there are so many. But once again, part of the problem is that there just is never enough. There's just never enough people within this field of work to provide services for the amount of those that needed truly inside of Ukraine. And so on top of this, you have some pretty large scale events, which obviously kind of take the focus here. You have the attack in Lviv, which requires a lot of focus now. as keep in mind, most of these people are already traumatized, fled from the eastern parts of Ukraine, now are in Lviv, and they're under rocket attacks again. Obviously, a lot of need in Kyiv, as this is where a lot of the wounded are coming back to. This is one of the main echelons of health services for those coming back from the front line. It's kind of their final stop for rest and recovery. And then you also have different incidents going on there towards the front lines, the Kherson region, specifically with the collapse and destruction of the Novokakhovka Dam, the flood that resulted in that, the displacement of people that that came as a result of that, repeated shellings of places such as of Odessa, places such as Kramatorsk, which recently had a very horrific attack not but 2 weeks ago. Kharkiv as well, which continues to see almost daily, or nightly, I should say, attacks by S-300 ballistic missiles and Iskander-M missiles coming out of Belgorod. So we're seeing a lot of needs, but not enough personnel, even though it sounds like a lot of groups. It's not. It really isn't. It's really not. There's just not enough people in the field to cover the needs of everyone, unfortunately. But they're doing their best to try and fill what gaps they can where they can. With that actually lets us get over here and into the front lines, and we can kind of see some developments here. Now, this is something we haven't talked a lot about over the last couple of streams, as you guys may have noticed. We're focused a lot more on humanitarian stuff as opposed to the frontline stuff. Part of that is purposeful choice. The purposeful choice for that is dependent on a couple of things. First of all, the mental health of the staff here that work on the news, myself included. It gets to you. It does seriously get to you in not a very good way. Even as someone who is relatively accustomed to the sights of the stuff coming out of frontline combat areas, it still gets to you. Everyone has a point. And so we've kind of peeled back off of the combat side of things a little bit to focus more on the humanitarian side of things and the humanitarian needs. But there is a war going on. And another big part of that is operational security. For those that may not be aware, Ukraine started to conduct a major counteroffensive, I'd say about 3 to 4 weeks ago. That major counteroffensive has seen gains. We are not entirely sure what those gains are, as there is very limited information coming out of that. There's operational security ongoing both on the Ukrainian end of things to get information from them, and we as an organization are also purposely conducting some operational security stuff to make sure that we're not giving away information that could potentially endanger Ukrainian forces. There have been some rather big events that have brought an eye to the counteroffensive. And something that was brought up very early on to the counteroffensive is a significant loss of Leopard 2s and Bradley infantry fighting vehicles that were lost by the Ukrainian forces after they got trapped in a minefield and engaged. They were severely damaged. I don't know if they were considered completely destroyed or not. It did not look as though any of them were catastrophically destroyed, but they were severely damaged. And they were eventually recovered. I saw a lot of comments regarding it, and that, well, I guess, the Ukrainians don't know how to use, Western equipment properly. That Western equipment isn't as good as we thought it was, that kind of thing. So I figured now's probably a good time to address it. It's a war. Wars are not one-sided. Wars are never one-sided. The enemy always has a say in combat. There have been and are going to be more losses of significant, very important Western equipment, to include main battle tanks, to include armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, all of these very fancy systems. I am impressed that there has not been a loss of a HIMARS system yet. But I do believe that before the end of the war, we will see that happen. And it is a significant event, but I do believe it will happen at least one time. It's not good, but it's a reality. The reality of warfare is you're going to lose things. You do not send this equipment into combat without the expectation that it is going to have some losses and some damage to it. And that's whether you're using it correctly or incorrectly. So the Western equipment is doing exactly what its job was. So far, I haven't heard of significant casualties amongst armored forces with the new fancy Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and Leopard 2s. They all appear to be doing just fine. The crew losses are minimal as a result of the damaged vehicles. The damaged vehicles were recovered, which means that they can be repaired and put back in service. As opposed to a lot of the captured and destroyed Russian vehicles like the T-90M I saw, which was completely burnt out and had no hope of recovery. That is the best model of the T-90 the Russians can field, and they do not have a lot of them. And we've already seen many of them destroyed and or significantly damaged and captured throughout the duration of the war thus far. So, yes, it has happened. Western equipment has been lost. Western trained troops have been killed in combat. Their equipment destroyed. Their equipment damaged. But that's kind of the name of the game in a war zone. So I don't see it really. None of the losses I have seen thus far have pointed to a significant incapability on the part of the Ukrainians in their military abilities, in their military structure. It seems that those units are doing just fine, and I keep track of how many units there are, and there's enough of them. I don't think it really mattered. Because the amount of units that they had in reserve specifically for this counteroffensive is insane to think about in troop numbers and equipment numbers. And we also know that the Russians are getting hit harder. We take a look over here at Makivka, if I can click on it right, where we see a very large explosion happening here in Makivka. This is an occupied Donetsk Oblast just outside of the city of Donetsk. And what this is suggesting is another precision strike by Ukrainian forces hitting an ammunition and equipment storage sites there in the back lines of the Russian forces. This is going to significantly hinder Russian capabilities. It's going to stretch out their supply lines, and it's going to force them to bring up additional supplies that they already had stockpiled closer to the front. They're going to now have to bring those from further back and try and restockpile. It's going to lengthen the amount of time it takes for resupply for the forces there at the front line, significantly hindering the occupational forces' ability to continue defensive efforts amidst the ongoing counteroffensive. Take a look here.
О, сука.
Now that is not what anybody would consider to be a good time. You can take a photo here. You can see the size and scope. So Makivka, we do know, has been used and continues to be used as a staging point and as an ammunition and supply depot point for the Russian Federation. It's just outside of the city of Donetsk, which serves as a headquarters location. It's close enough to the front lines to be viable, but far enough back that standard artillery can't hit it, so it requires HIMARS and precision strike capability to do so. The issue is that Ukraine possesses precision strike capabilities with the HIMARS and Mars 2 systems, and also the Excalibur rounds for the 155 guns, just as the Caesar artillery gun and the M777 towed artillery that they already maintain. So, so basically, if you're at a supply depot anywhere in occupied Russian territory, you should probably be shaking in your boots because you are a target. And considering that the amount of intelligence networking that is ongoing inside of Ukraine, I would not be surprised if you are the next target. We jump down here. This is some footage coming out from the counteroffensive. Some of it is coming from further up by Bakhmut. Some of it is coming down here out of the Zaporizhia Oblast. Heavy fighting is continuing throughout the east and the southeast of Ukraine. There have been gains. Those gains are subject to some comparison to some other maps at this point, because we do not know just how much or how little. But both veteran and freshly trained Western trained and Western equipped units are fighting on the front lines. At this point, they poured significant amounts of reserves into the fight, both in the Donetsk region and Zaporizhia Oblast, and even some of the Kherson Oblast, as we've seen. They're it seems to be a rather slow advance, as there is stiff resistance right now. That's just as a result of the gains that they've made previously. The more area that the Ukraine is able to take back, that means less area that the Russians have to defend. So it's a double-edged sword, unfortunately. Information on their movements, once again, has been limited due to operational security, so difficulties do remain in accurately portraying the situation there on the ground. But we do have a couple of videos coming in here. Take a look. This 72nd Mechanized Brigade on a BTR-80 has gunfire support. Take a look.
Давай, 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 давай! Вытягивайся, блядь! Давай! Кто налегке? Берите раненых! Прекрати! Тяни, тяни! Надо, тяни! Иван, сил нема на... Вытягивайте его! Окрасники! Берите раненых! Кто из вас может идти? Поможешь им автомат!
Similar to this, we also have some footage. This is from the 3rd Assault Brigade, which is there in Bakhmut doing some assaults. Take a look. A demise as casualty or shell shock. That guy seems to be a casualty. I don't know if you noticed, but in that opening, it looks like he actually got hit on the other side and was crawling through and he had help getting pulled out.
А ось вже посадка. Єбать, що почнеться.
Готовились! Десант земля! Десант земля! Вперед! Десятикон! Десятикон, сука!
Бодя, за них! Давай, давай! Да? Да, давай! Сдавайся, пидорас! Давай! На связи, Дацик. ПК экономим! Продвигаемся в посадку! Там, пидоры, вперед! Продвигаемся! Давай, давай! Обходим справа и слева, бегом! Своя! Своя! Е!
Мы еще живы!
Вас никто не будет трогать, никто не будет пиздить.
Сразу, блядь.
Парни, никто вас...
Так, блядь, сука, дебіли, от, сука, ви йобані дебіли. Хто вам, сука, сказав, що ми, сука, блядь, убиваем і режем? Хто? Ну хто, нахуй? Поверьте, у нас людяного більше, ніж у кого-либо, нахуй. Ми взяли на горбу ваших двох пленних, ранених, надали допомогу, і вони вже поїхали.
Вони вже в лікарні.
Да.
Мы не русские.
Да, братан.
Мы защищаем свою территорию.
So as you can hear, as they're doing that assault, they get battery fire on their own, on the Russians' own positions. By the way, That is well within danger close, but they're on their own positions, essentially calling in grad fire to take these guys out. And as you can see, it did not work. But the grad is pretty terrifying. It fires 40-round salvos of 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets, so not what I would consider to be a very fun time. Jumping down here and into the Kherson Oblast, we can see clean drinking water is in the works. Preparations have reportedly begun on the installation of new water mains to the Kherson region to begin supply of water to roughly 1 million people who are still residing within the region. This comes as a result of the attack on the Novokakhovka hydropower plant, which was destroyed late last month. And just take a look. This is coming from Andrei Krubakov, who is the Alexander Kubrakov, sorry, who is the head of the, he's the Vice Prime Minister of the Restoration of Ukraine, Minister of Communication and Territories Development and Infrastructure of Ukraine. So we can take a look here. We can see the water mains going in. And they do have quite a bit that they have to lay. But that does cover everything happening inside of the country of Ukraine, but that is not everything in the news. As we immediately roll into the international segment of the news, we actually jump down here and into Ankara and Turkey. We can see Turkey is now backing the Ukrainian NATO bid. Turkey has publicly announced that they back Ukraine's bid to join the NATO military alliance. Ukraine has requested to be fast-tracked into the alliance. However, many NATO member states remain very skeptical as fears of escalation with Russia could draw NATO into the conflict directly. You can see here both the president of Turkey, Erdogan, as well as Volodymyr Zelensky, also signed a document regarding the NATO bid for Ukraine. Jumping down here and into Palestine. 9 people were killed at a refugee camp. Israel attacked the Jenin refugee camp once again in the northern occupied area of the West Bank on July 3rd. The Israeli Defense Forces operation killed at least 9 people and injured 24 other Palestinians. If you would like some more information on that, you can check out a news article on Al Jazeera as well as reliefweb.international. Over here in the Manipur region of India, violence has erupted between religious and ethnic groups. On Sunday, July 2nd, fresh fighting erupted along the border between Charachnadampur and Bishnupur districts, resulting in 5 deaths, including 1 police officer. On July 7th, a woman was shot dead outside a school that had just reopened. Manipur's largely Hindu Meitei community, over half of the population, and Christian majority Kuki tribal group, 16% of population, have been attacking each other for over 2 months now. The violent attacks between communities have already caused 133 deaths, 230 injuries, 1,700 house fires, and over 60,000 people having been displaced. Human Rights Watch does have an article thus far regarding the incidents. You take a look here. This is a house fire. Let me see more fires taking place here. Religious tensions continue inside of India amongst the majority Hindu population, predominantly, engaging some of these smaller ethnic and religious groups, such as the Muslim groups, which we've seen over the last few days, or over the last few months, as well as now Christian groups as well. And a lot of this seems to be partially government sanctioned. Or at least the government of India is turning a very big blind eye to what is happening to people throughout the India and these regions. Here in Mongolia, thousands have been affected by a heavy flood. Heavy rain since July 3rd has continued to affect the population living in Mongolia's capital. An estimated 128,000 civilians from 31,600 households has been affected by the flood, with more than 20,000 now staying in temporary safe shelters. The UNICEF has provided 10 heavy-duty heavy-duty pumps and pipes and medical supplies, and initiated hygiene promotion and psychosocial support. The Mongolian Red Cross Society has mobilized blankets, mattresses, kitchen sets, disposable masks, gloves, personal protective equipment, rain boots, and sanitation chemicals thus far. Coming out of Hong Kong, arrest warrants and bounties have been issued for democracy activists. 8 pro-democracy activists are being targeted once again by the Chinese government for dissent, with the Chinese government issuing arrest warrants and bounties on the individuals. As part of the UK's handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, it was required that Hong Kong enjoy autonomy in all things with the exception of foreign relations and defense for 50 years following that 1997 handover. However, in the past 5 years, China has begun to assert more dominance in the city and begun to remove the autonomy of the city, the autonomy which the city has enjoyed for over 100 years. You see, coming from IPAC Global, or the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Today, their statement states, today, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, or IPAC, learned with dismay of the arrest warrants have been issued by the Hong Kong National Security Police for 8 human rights defenders. The news confirms fears of Hong Kongers abroad that represents the dangerous escalation in Beijing's global war on dissent. IPAC repudiates accusations of collusion with foreign forces, incitement to subversion, and incitement of secession under the so-called national security law, illegitimately imposed by the PRC in violation of the Sino-British Joint Declaration and fundamental freedoms under international law. IPAC further deplores the offer of 1 million Hong Kong dollar bounties for each of the 8 democracy activists, together with statements of the chief superintendent that Hong Kong authorities will not stop chasing them. These comments will exacerbate community tensions that are likely to precipitate unacceptable infringements of sovereignty. Calling on the governments to use all means at their disposal to protect those targeted from this unlawful persecution and abuse of international justice and police cooperation mechanisms. Make crystal clear that any activity aimed at the apprehension on democratic soil is unacceptable and will be met with full force of the law. Urgently repeal any and all existing extradition treaties with Hong Kong and the PRC. Adopt substantive mechanisms to address the growing transnational repression coming from the PRC and Hong Kong, and take decisive steps to hold those responsible for eroding fundamental freedoms to account, including but not limited to the imposition of targeted sanctions. IPAC further calls on the Interpol to firmly uphold Article 3 of its constitution, barring any issuance of red notices for political persecution. We continue to stand in solidarity with the people of Hong Kong and advocate for the reinstallment of full civil and political rights. Once again, there's 24 additional years still left on that of the 50-year contract, which means that on a technicality, now, do I think it'll happen? No. But on a technicality, since the PRC is violating the contract and treaty, the United Kingdom, if I'm not mistaken, does hold full right to actually go and reclaim Hong Kong. Which, probably would not go very well, but it's a thing that can happen. Because it's technically a treaty. The treaty was that Hong Kong maintains autonomy except for international and defense purposes for 50 years. Well, it's been 26. This year marks 26 years. There's still 24 to go. And it's being violated. That means that Hong Kong technically, the treaty has been violated, so it technically can still be considered a UK territory. Which, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure Hong Kong may actually welcome at this point. Because there's been a lot of violence against Hong Kong and a lot of crackdowns by the PRC. So, I don't know, UK, come get your city, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, man. Come get your city, please. Jump over here and into Africa. We'll actually start off here in Tunisia, where a boat sinking off of Tunisia has left at least one dead and at least 10 migrants currently missing. The sinking comes only weeks after a similar incident left dozens dead at the end of June, an incident overshadowed by the sinking of the Titan submersible with the 5 hands on board. This continues to be a problem. We'll continue seeing a problem with this within the Mediterranean going forward. This has been a long-standing issue as a result of the Arab Spring, which occurred in the early 2010s, and as a result of an uptick in violence throughout Africa over the last few decades. And this is something that we'll continue to probably, unfortunately, have to read about, as millions of people are trying to flee these areas and have no other choice but to take overcrowded, ill-prepared boats to try and make it to Europe. Now, with some countries, such as Italy, actively preventing the assistance of these individuals if they happen to then sink off the coast of Italy or other countries. In Ethiopia, coming from the African Union, the AU is to receive 18 million malaria vaccine doses. 12 countries in Africa are set to receive 18 million doses of the malaria vaccine over the next 2 years. Gavi announced this yesterday, bringing 9 new countries into the fold: Benin, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cameroon, the DRC, Liberia, Niger, Sierra Leone, and Uganda. Global Health Strategies did announce this. Sudan has a suspected measles outbreak. 13 children have died from a suspected measles outbreak at a camp in Sudan's White Nile state. Reports of Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, which treated 223 children with suspected cases between June 6th and through the 27th, amid the conflict that has displaced nearly 2.8 million people. That conflict does continue, but it seems to have simmered down somewhat between the two factions there in Sudan. Finally, in Burkina Faso, civilians were killed and there were forced displacements. A non-state armed group raided Bagonde on July the 5th. They broke into houses and killed 12 inhabitants, including women, and set some houses on fire. The armed group ordered the populations to leave the areas. These attacks have exacerbated, which led to a massive displacement of the population. According to the data from the Operational Coordination Group, or the OCG, of the rapid response, there have been 35,000 new internally displaced persons registered in April, 67,000 in May, and 13,000 in June. It has been reported that 95% of the shelter needs are not being covered, and that 3 million people are deprived of care due to the closure of 365 separate health centers throughout Burkina Faso. Slightly better news: illegal deforestation has declined in Brazil. According to the Brazilian government, deforestation in Brazil's Amazon fell by a third in the first 6 months of the new president's term, compared with the same period in 2022. If you would like some more information on that ongoing situation, you can take a look at bbc.com, which does have more information. Our last 2 points of the night reside up here in the Maryland, D.C. area. The first one comes from the U.S. FDA, which the U.S. FDA has granted full approval to a new Alzheimer drug. U.S. Food and Drug Administration converted accelerated approval to a traditional approval for Leqembi, a new drug targeting Alzheimer's, on July the 6th of 2023, following clinical benefit verified by confirmatory trial. This is the first medication approved that has demonstrated actual clinical benefit and is slowing down the progression of Alzheimer's. The WHO estimated that there are currently more than 55 million people having dementia worldwide, with 60 to 70% might be having Alzheimer's. An estimated 5.5 million people in the United States have Alzheimer's currently, and the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, announced that Medicare coverage is now available following the FDA's decision. The cost of the medication is estimated to be at $26,500 a year for treatment. We can see that FDA announcement from their website. And finally, I don't know if you guys happen to be out, if you were in the United States and enjoying the fireworks for July the 4th. You guys may have noticed something very particularly cool about that night. The fact is that on July the 4th and more or less July the 3rd, there was a full lunar moon, and it being at its closest point in the orbit around Earth, it means that it was a supermoon. So it was exceptionally large and exceptionally bright as compared to normal. And we can take a look at the wonderful photography taking place. This is from Beirut, Lebanon, courtesy of Reuters. This is Kuwait City, courtesy of AFP. Basra, Baghdad, or Basra, Iraq, sorry. And Dubai. And that was the supermoon amidst a large set of fireworks on the 4th of July. Very, very nice photo. This is actually coming from NASA. They said that the cover rate goes to Michael Seeley. And that is everything in the news that we have for this week. Quite a few things there. So quite a lot of interesting things ongoing throughout the world, quite a few developments. Obviously, we're still trying to track the ongoing counteroffensive, but it's been a little bit difficult. The staff shortages also haven't helped lately, so I apologize for the inconsistency in the streams and the content. So we'll be continuing trying to figure out what's going on. We're going to continue trying to get some streams uploaded on a weekly basis if we can. Might try and put some other content out there, just some different stuff that is of my interest as we go forward. We'll just have to see. But always happy to see everyone back. It's been nice to be back and be covering the news again. Glad to see everyone who showed up here today. Always happy to have you. Hope to see you guys back here, hopefully on next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central, for another week of news and review. In the meantime, please be sure to check out the video description below and try and, if you can, give as much as you can to the wonderful organizations listed down there in the description. 70% or more of the donations they receive go directly to their programs, which means they go directly to helping people, with 30% or more or less going to things such as salaries and administration's costs. If you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is help us grow this channel. Like and share the content that we have, and go back and spread it amongst your different communities, your friends and family. The more, the merrier. And so with that, we'll hope to see you guys back here once again next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central, for another week of news and review. In the meantime, please remember to be safe. I hope that you, your family, and your friends remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. And enjoy the next week. And I hope to see you guys back here again. My name is Paul from the New News. And have a fantastic rest of your week, everybody. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Історія до повноваги і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шверхуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Історія до повноваги і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Історія до повноваги і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkled bomb. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Russian soldiers. soldiers gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волноваги чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Gone home, Russian soldiers gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волноваги чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Gone home, Russian soldiers gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волноваги чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Ідіть нахуй.